The last thing is, as we're examining prophets, right now we're examining God's vision. What is it that God sees for humanity, sees for the world, sees for all of the nations? And how can we plug into and live out that vision in the world? As we move from connecting to God's story into God's vision, one of the primary vehicles for that in the Old Testament and in ancient Israel and Judea was through poetry. The prophets that we're reading were primarily poets. Their writings were poetry. Their words were poetry. They were calling up these visuals and these images and these imaginations that we can plug into and grab hold of. And so we're inviting poets. If you write, does anybody write poetry? Poets don't want to volunteer their hands. But if you are interested in reading your poetry or spoken word or something as part of our service, it would help us to step into this prophetic sort of season that we're in as a church. As we're trying to capture vision and imagination and reorient our lives to what God is doing in the world, poetry is really a helpful way to do that, a way to connect, a way to share our feelings, and to express truths that we can't necessarily just come out and say. And today, we'll be reading from the prophet Micah, who was ultimately one of the first, I would say, slam poets of ancient Israel. So if you are a poet, if you have any poetry or prayers that you have written that you would like to share for the community's benefit, please let me know. I'll be gathering those. Otherwise, it'll just be my prayers and poems and stuff, so you probably don't want to hear those. Okay, so this topic today we're talking about is justice. Justice is a word that we hear all the time in culture, is it not? When's the last time you heard somebody talk about justice? Was it yesterday? Hands up if it was yesterday. Right. Everybody is talking about justice and injustice, and it's popular in our culture, and that's great. However, I think that our vision of justice has been skewed from God's vision of justice. Let me say that again. I think that our vision of justice has been skewed from God's vision of what justice is. The prophet Micah came to a city, Jerusalem, and a country, Judea, in a geographical, sort of geopolitical landscape where things were going super, super well. People were rich, they were comfortable, they were well-fed, they had lots of money, they had a lot of military success, they had a united Israel and Judea. Micah stepped into a profitable, a comfortable, a ordered society. Does this sound familiar? Have you heard of a society like this? I'm alluding to ours, in case you're wondering. And Micah came to speak about justice in this society. What does this mean? And I recently went on a trip across the state to Seattle, and on the way I discovered this new podcast that I'm just all about right now. It's called Myths and Legends. This guy takes old folklore and mythology and anthologizes it and rewrites it for a modern age, and it's awesome. The guy's voice is like totally nerdy. You can just see him like dungeon mastering, but he's an awesome writer, very, very imaginative. And he told a story that really captured my imagination. It's short, so I wanted to retell it. Would you guys be up for hearing a story? Yeah. Okay. So there once was a merchant, and he lived in the Middle East. And this merchant had a wife, and this merchant went on business trips frequently out to the sea. And one time, while he was away on a business trip, his trip was very long. It was probably 6 months. He came home, and he was very surprised to find that his wife was with child. He goes, She seemed to be about 3 months along, so he was like, well, okay, 6, 3, How did this happen? The man was bewildered. The man was upset. The man was nervous. And so he asks his wife, and she says, you wouldn't believe it. I was coming home from church, and a snowflake fell on my nose. And now I'm with child. The merchant was skeptical, and needing a moment to gather his thoughts, he went back out to sea. When he came back, the child was born. And she said, look, my husband, our snow baby, is born. The husband had never had any reason to doubt his wife. The merchant felt that his wife was fair. She was an honest woman. She came from a good background. She'd never caused him any reason to doubt in the past, but he just couldn't buy that a snowflake touched her nose and she became pregnant. And they now had a snow baby. Well, out of love for his wife, he remained in the marriage. He remained raising the child. And when the child came of age, the father was upset. He didn't see much resemblance between the two. Maybe he never tried to really connect with the child, but there was something about the child that was different from himself, and he just couldn't shake the feeling that this child was a product of infidelity. Well, the boy, when he was of age, he said, "Father, will you take me out to teach me your trade, to be a merchant?" And the father, at this time, weary of his son and raising this illegitimate child, said, "Of course, come with me." And he took him out to Alexandria in Egypt. And in the far shores of Alexandria, he walked up to a merchant's booth, and he took some gold, and he said, "Go with this man. He will show you what you need to know." And the boy said, "Oh, interesting. I guess I'll go with this guy and learn. I thought I would be learning from you, Father." And he said, No, this man is much better than I. When he went into the back room, he was clamped in shackles. He'd been sold as a slave. And the merchant drove back, or sailed back, to his wife. And the merchant was happy to finally be rid of the child. But he knew that he would have to explain to his wife, "Where did my child go? What happened?" And so he devised a plot. When he arrived, his wife naturally asked, "What of our snow baby? Where did he go? Was he not supposed to learn the trade of selling and buying from you?" He said, "Well, my wife, you wouldn't believe it, but we were traveling through the desert, and our son, our snow child, melted." And the wife swallowed hard, trying to decide if now was the time to tell him or not. But she couldn't bring herself to do so. And that's the story. The man turns to his wife and says, "Do you think this really happened?" And she said, "I don't know." And he says, "Was he really a snow child?" And she stayed silent. This is a story of injustice, is it not? Because injustice works in this way, in the dark, in secrecy, behind closed doors. The victims of injustice are always silent. The victims of injustice never see it coming. The victims of injustice are always the innocent. Does the wife get what she deserves? Maybe. Does the husband get what he deserves? Who knows? They remain married. Their lives go on as normal. But this child's life is forever ruined by secrecy. Justice happens in the light. Injustice happens in the dark, in blindness. And I started thinking about justice after I was planning to prepare to preach this sermon, and I heard this story, and I thought, man, what an unjust system. Here's this innocent kid. But the point is about the parents. It's a story about trust. I said, no, this is a story ultimately of injustice. I started thinking about our symbols of justice, and this is our primary symbol of justice here. Lady Justice. Can you see her? Bronze, tall, often 8 feet or 9 feet tall with scales. She's holding scales in her left hand and a sword in her right hand. Lady Justice adorns our courtrooms. She adorns our halls of justice in America. The Supreme Court has a large justice out front. Lady Justice, you could say, is our God of justice. Lady Justice leads us in the way of law and order. And what are her primary symbols? That she is blindfolded. Well, what does that mean, that justice is blind? That it keeps no record of the past? That it judges just based on the rules and the facts, on scales, and with a sword, ready to strike, but symbolizing the authority to have the ability to do so. Where did Lady Justice come from? Does anybody know? Lady Justice came from the Roman Empire. In fact, it was Tiberius, the Caesar at the time of Jesus, who instated Justitia as the god of justice in the pantheon. Justitia was the god under which Tiberius Caesar demanded that his image be worshipped as a god. It was under justice and rule that Herod Agrippa II became proconsul of Judea and slaughtered all of the babies looking for the Messiah. It was under the God of justice, the reign of Tiberius Caesar, that Pontius Pilate put an innocent man to death under religious law by handing him over to the Jews. You see, it was under this goddess, this blind justice, this justice that is concerned only with rules, that fails to remove the blindfold and see society, that makes these harsh decisions. Who owns justice? But whoever steers her shoulders, whoever provides her with her scale and her sword. Justice is blind. That's what we believe, isn't it? Isn't that what we always say? Justice is blind? But blind justice leads to hurt in people's lives. I'm going to say that again because we don't believe it. You don't believe it as I'm saying it to you. Blind justice leads to hurt in people's lives. And I can prove this. Micah spoke about this. Our leaders have spoke about this. Our leaders in civil rights and movements that have changed society, that have moved us forward, have spoke about this. It's not in the darkness that justice is done. It is only once we drop our sword, discard our scales, and remove our blindfold that we can really do the work of justice. And Micah was aware of this. This is what was happening in Judea. There were all of these social rules and structures. There were just societal norms. For instance, land was sold with interest, and money was lent with interest. And the food that was meant to nourish the poor at the gates of the garden was harvested and sold at festivals along with sacrificial animals. So that what? So that you could be right with God. This was happening in ancient Judea. And Micah came out into the city square while a much more popular prophet, that's a tongue twister, much more popular prophet Isaiah was preaching in the north. Isaiah had disciples. Scrolls were being run around with Isaiah's teachings. Isaiah was railing against the injustice in the north. But there was this man, this slam poet, I imagine, without a following, only 7 chapters in the Bible, Micah, who spoke about this injustice in Judea. Judea was a comfortable nation. Things were going well. They had won wars. The economy was booming. People were rich and comfortable. And Micah came out and he said things like this: "Woe to those who devise wickedness and work evil on their beds," because it's those with beds that have the power, not those sleeping on the street. "When the morning dawns, they perform it, because it is in the power of their hand. They covet fields and seize them." I like that land. I will take it or buy it at a bargain. "And houses and take them away, and oppress a man and his house, a man and his inheritance. Therefore, thus says the Lord, behold, against this family I am devising disaster, from which you cannot remove your necks, and you shall not walk haughtily, for it will be a time of disaster. In that day they shall take up a taunt song against you and moan bitterly." Micah was saying, yeah, things seem pretty good for you as you're devising wickedness, as you're thinking about, how do I get the best deal for myself? Not thinking about who will I have to sell out to get that deal, who will I have to cheat. And one of the ways that this happens is we put on our blindfolds. Society puts blindfolds on us. They force us to take up the sword and the scale and judge between rules and social customs and say, well, I want to follow the rules. I want to do the things that I'm supposed to do without asking, is this just? Micah's indictments go on. He says, "Listen, you heads of Jacob, you rulers of the house of Israel." This is against the government, the aristocrats, the ones making the rules. "Should you not know justice? You who hate the good and love the evil, who tear the skin off my people and the flesh off their bones. Thus says the Lord concerning the prophets," another class. The rulers made the law. The prophets declared God's law. "Who lead my people astray, who cry peace when they have something to eat, but declare war against those who put nothing into their mouths. Therefore it shall be night to you without vision, and darkness to you without revelation. The sun shall go down upon the prophets, and the day shall be black over them." Micah was calling out to the powers in Judea, the powerful classes. He was calling out to the people who had influence, the people who spoke of the law, the people who spoke of God, the people who made the rules that govern society and social norms. And Micah says, are you not led by your stomachs? Are you not led by your greed? Are you not led by your desires more than by God? You see, the prophets in that time would just give prophecies to whoever paid the highest price. And you best believe that the highest price got the best fortunes, the best divinations, the best guarantee of their future success, on which the government would say, well, look, this prophet is saying that we'll be successful. And the people go, okay, yeah, let's follow that. Let's do that. But Micah wasn't all harsh words. Micah also spoke of hope. And the way that we get to that hope comes to us in the most popular passage of Micah, from Micah 6. Micah 6 to 8. An indictment is brought before Israel, and Israel says, well, what can I do? And Micah is speaking as the nation. With what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before God on high? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams and 10,000s of rivers of oil? Side note, everybody in Judea and Israel at the time would think yes. That would make God happy. 10,000 rams? That's expensive. You're giving up a lot of your money, a lot of your material wealth to God, and you're slaughtering it in the religious ritual. That's absolutely what God wants. It's what the prophets are saying the law says. Offer the right sacrifices, and God will be pleased. But Micah turns it on its head and says, shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? Instantly a challenge. He's calling them, furthermore, to human sacrifice. Something that was rampant in culture. Something that was happening on every hilltop in Judea and Israel. But something that the people knew was wrong in the eyes of God. To kill humans, like the pagan gods. And Micah says this, he has told you, O mortal, what is good. What does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God? To do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly. Note what the prophet doesn't say. The Lord requires that you follow all of the commandments of the religious law. That the prophet requires that you follow every dot of the Levitical code. That you behave in morally acceptable ways. No, the requirement of God is only this, from the prophet's mouth, to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with God. Justice is not holding a scale. Do you know where the scale comes from as a symbol for the God of justice? It comes from Egypt. Remember what Egypt did to the Israelites? Enslaved them. It was from Egypt that the Lord rescued Israel. And the scale that we've come to associate with justice comes from the god of death from Egypt, Anubis. Anubis is this terrifying monster, half man, half jackal, the head of a jackal. What do you know about jackals? They're wild dogs. They often will bite down on something until it dies. Their jaw is unrelenting. When they have made their judgment, it is final. The god of death did not concern himself with human affairs. Anubis stayed mostly in Duat. He didn't really come up to the surface world. He didn't mingle with mortals. He didn't get to know their ways at all. Anubis just sat in Duat and waited for people to come, and he would weigh their heart against a feather on the scales. If the heart was heavier than a feather, it was eternal torture in the jaws of Leviathan, this monstrous crocodile. Or, if it was lighter than a feather, eternal bliss, the life of a pharaoh with Anubis. But you had only one chance to come before this God, this fierce, merciless, judgmental God with the bite of a jackal and the stature of the strongest man. He was to be your judge. This is the justice that we believe in. It's the justice outside of our courtrooms. It's the justice outside of our Supreme Court. It's the justice on our money. This is the justice that we believe in, a justice of scales, one that says, we will weigh your actions, and we will take decisive action. And we will do it with no regard for anything but the rules that are placed in front of us, with the codex that lines out our laws and regulations. And we will do it with a sword in hand. Blind justice does harm in people's lives. We have to ditch the scales. We have to remove the blindfold. We have to. Because Micah says, if we do, this is what's coming. In the days to come, the mountain of the Lord's house will be established as the highest of the mountains, above the mountains where they practiced human sacrifice, and shall be raised up above the hills. People shall stream to it. From many nations shall come and say, not just from Israel, from many nations shall come and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth instruction, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. The word of the Lord, the word become flesh, Jesus. He shall judge between many peoples, and shall arbitrate between strong nations far and away. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore, but they shall all sit under their own vines, and under their own fig trees. Quick side note, that's a Hebrew idiom that means in closeness to God. Under the vine, under the fig tree, that's where people went to meditate on Scripture. They would live close to God in their own nations. And no one shall make them afraid, for the mouth of the Lord of hosts has spoken. And here's the real challenge for us. We have this goddess of justice that we so firmly believe in, that we follow. To this day, the Roman Empire followed her. The Western world has followed her. We follow her. We follow blind justice. We follow rules and regulations over people, over what is right and what is wrong in our context, in our lives, in the lives of others. Micah says, for all the peoples will walk, each in the name of its God, in the name of justice or in the name of the Lord. But we will walk in the name of the Lord our God forever and ever. And all of this made me think, as I was reading Micah, I was getting fired up. I was like, yeah, let's go. Let's do justice. Let's do the stuff. Let's get rid of all the old stuff. I thought, well, how does Jesus do this? How did Jesus actually live justice? He walked in step with God. And what do you know about Jesus? What was Jesus always doing with the Pharisees? Explaining why he was doing things when? On the Sabbath. He was always violating the rules. Jesus threw away the scales. He took off his blindfold. He didn't care if it was a Sabbath, if there were sick and hurting and oppressed people. He just didn't care. It made me think of a story from the Gospels. And this is one of my favorite stories from the Gospels. I like it because it's really weird. And I also like it because it challenges me in a number of different ways. It challenges me in a way that I hope it will challenge you. So I encourage you just to listen to this story from the Gospel. And I picked it from Luke. Luke really personified Jesus as a prophet. And so in line with the prophets, this is how Jesus acted in justice. Oh. Yeah, we'll skip Gandhi. It's good. Maybe we'll come back to it. Then they arrived at the country of the Gerasenes, which is opposite Galilee. And he stepped out on land. A man of the city who had demons met him. For a long time, he had worn no clothes, and he lived in a house, not in a house, but in the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he fell down before him and shouted at the top of his voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me." This man, who people are terrified of, comes to Jesus terrified. The irony is thick. Just like the fog. Imagine this. Foggy, Lake Galilee, pull up on the shore, step out of the boat. Demon man approaches and bows at the feet of Jesus, covered in self-mutilation injuries, covered in dirt, probably vomit. Maybe blood from, who knows? Is it from the animals that he's eating with his teeth? Is it from his injuries? Is it from people? I don't know. I imagine Jesus stepping forward and all of the disciples stepping back. Let's just get in the boat and drive away. Do not torment me. For Jesus had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. For many times it had seized him. He was kept under guard and bound with chains and shackles, but he would break the bonds and be driven by the demon into the wilds. Jesus then asked him, "What is your name?" He said, "Legion," for many demons had entered him. They begged him not to order them to go back into the abyss. Legion. Like, whoa. It's like when you're on the phone, and then all of a sudden somebody else chimes in, and you're like, wait, am I talking on a conference call? Right? Or when you used to call, like if you were dating in middle school, and you'd call and be like, "Hey, is Kelly there?" And they'd be like, "Yeah." And then you'd be talking, and then you'd hear breathing, and she'd be like, "Alex!" He'd be like, "What? Get off the phone." It was back in the day. It doesn't happen anymore because of the cell phone and everything. But Legion, unexpected. There's more than one demon here. Now they're on the hillside. A large herd of swine was feeding, unclean animals that generated a lot of profit to foreign nations because the Jews couldn't eat them, so they had to be traded internationally. And for a markup, a lot of money, a lot of meat, good meat. You guys like bacon? Yeah, so did people then. Was feeding, and the demons begged Jesus to let them enter these. So he gave them permission. Then the demons came out of the man and entered the swine, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and was drowned. Now, when the swineherd saw what had happened, they ran off and told it in the city and in the country. Then people came out to see what had happened, and when they came to Jesus, they found the man whom the demons had gone sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind. What a reversal. And they were afraid. Those who had seen it told them how the one who had been possessed by demons had been healed. Then all the people of the surrounding country of the Gerasenes asked Jesus to leave them, for they were seized with great fear. So he got into the boat and returned. The man from whom the demons had gone begged that he might be with him, but Jesus sent him away, saying, "Return to your home and declare how much God has done for you." So he went away, proclaiming throughout the city how much Jesus had done for him. Seeing people healed is uncomfortable. Seeing people afflicted is uncomfortable. We don't want anything to do with either, if we're really honest. We talked to somebody who's recently out of prison, on the other side of a hard divorce, and that's okay. I don't really know. We maybe laugh like, "Oh, it's too bad you were in prison. What was that like? I've never been." We're uncomfortable with the healing process. We're even more uncomfortable with the affliction. This challenges me every day. The other day, I was walking down to AMC. I live over on Riverside. And I was walking, and I was going to meet somebody for a movie, and there was a man who had his pants around his knees, and he was wearing 4 pairs of dirty pants, like basketball shorts, and then another pair of shorts, and then a pair of jeans, and some slip-on, swishy pants over the top, And he had a water bottle, and he's just throwing it at the wall, and he's screaming at the wall, just in the middle of downtown, just screaming at it. He's throwing stuff. He's spitting at it. At one point, he kicked the wall. There's a little dog with him. And you know what I did? I went across the street to get to the movies and was like, "That's crazy." That's our reaction to that kind of thing, isn't it? I see it every day. I walk by people yelling at nothing, talking to nobody. And you know what's sad about that? They're talking to nobody all the time. Because nobody will talk to them. Nobody wants to ask, "Where is your pain from?" Nobody wants to ask, "What is that blood on you? Where did that come from? Is that from you? Is that from somebody else?" Nobody wants to give the demons an audience, much less find any place for them to go. But Jesus didn't think about it twice. Yeah, whatever. Go to the pigs. Would it have been easier for Jesus to eradicate the demons and destroy them? Sure. Would it have been just for the demons? Nobody thinks about this. Jesus did. He honored their request. Should we send you to the abyss so that we never face you again? Or should we see what this destructive power does? He sent them into the pigs, and the pigs all killed themselves. And the people were scared because now they're poor. Like before, they had a lot of money, they had a lot of pigs, and their economy had tanked because Jesus did something good for somebody who was afflicted. When the others were perfectly happy letting him live up in the hills, shackled in chains, covered in his own blood and filth. Do you see how this happens today? I saw it in this man that I walked right by on the street. I see it in people I walk by on the street as I leave this church, or as I come in the morning. I'll let them deal with their own demons. I don't want to find any place for them to go. And because I believe in blind justice, the law will take care of them. Somebody else will take care of them. Somebody will raise a sword. The scales will tip in their favor. It has to. Or maybe the scales have already tipped in their favor. Maybe they're here because they deserve it. This is the tape that plays in my head, rather than the Jesus tape that says, hurting person? Let's do something about that. Let's do something about that. Let me do something about that. Let me take off my blindfold. You see, Jesus didn't have scales. He didn't have a sword. This was a problem. When he rode into Jerusalem, he didn't carry a sword and a white horse like Caesar did. He came in on a donkey, unarmed. Still a symbol of authority, but not the symbol of authority that they wanted, because they wanted scales and blindfolds and regulations and rules that made sense and justice that was oriented in a way that was convenient for them, not to have their eyes opened. I want to return to what Gandhi said here because it is really good. Oh, this is going the wrong direction. Okay, hold on. This is my first time using this thing, so bear with me here. Okay, there we go, Gandhi. Gandhi said this, and this is for more brain food, but 7 plunders of the world that lead to violence. Wealth without work, pleasure without conscience, knowledge without character, commerce without morality, science without humanity, worship without sacrifice, politics without principle. You guys, this was the ancient world. This was Egypt. This is how Egypt operated with Anubis. Like, somebody else will decide what happens to you and your fate, and hopefully your heart just weighs out okay, you know? There's anxiety, but there were rules and regulations. This is the kind of world where justice is blind and carries a sword and scales. When we have politics without principle and worship without sacrifice. We have wealth without work. Devising wickedness on our beds, as Micah would call it. How can I get that guy to give me that easement? How can I get that guy to get off my property? How can I get that guy to sell me his land? I think it was this kind of logic. Eyes open, like Jesus, came before a man and saw just a hurting man, oppressed by a legion of demons. He didn't see a grotesque monster. He didn't see somebody who was a threat to his family. He saw a man in need, oppressed, with simple solutions. Bandage those wounds, clean up that dirt, put on some clothes, sit here, follow the order, it will help you. People will accept. Go into your town and speak about what's happened. Show them how much you've changed. Jesus did a lot in that little action. And we can do a little bit too. So the people screaming at walls are nothing. Maybe you. There is something we can do. I think it was this that really captured the imagination of Martin Luther King Jr. On Monday, we celebrated Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Did anybody go out and march? Anybody? No? Okay. I didn't either, so not saying that you have to. But march, protest, vote. Martin Luther King said this: "Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred, because that's eye for an eye justice. That's blind justice. That's scales justice. That's justice with the sword." He said this instead: "Darkness cannot cast out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that." Think about what Martin Luther King Jr. did. What happened in the 60s when Martin Luther King stood up on the Lincoln Memorial steps and delivered his I Have a Dream speech is he led a group of people into the North to speak in front of the nation's capital, a group of white and black people, a group of people that were empowered by events in Birmingham a year ago when color TV sets across the nations beamed in for the first time to homes in Washington, in California, in Utah, scenes of horrific violence. Black people being sprayed by water hoses, by the city fire department. Black people being set upon by dogs in the streets for standing up for equality, for standing up against scales justice, laws that tilted against them. There were literal laws that we were following from our courts that said that black and white people couldn't be in the same schools. They couldn't use the same drinking fountains. And our blind justice allowed this. But as soon as people's blindfolds were removed and they saw the brutality that was happening, they came out to hear what Martin Luther King Jr. had to say. Granted, he died right after this. His vision and his dream has moved on. It still empowers us. Just like Micah's vision of a mountain of the Lord that is higher than the mountain of human sacrifice should be something that empowers us. Just like Micah's call to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with God should inspire us. Martin Luther King never picked up the sword. Jesus never picked up the sword. What are we going to do? What kind of justice do we believe in? It's a serious question. Do we believe this? That God has told us what is good, us mortals, to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. I'm going to give you an example from my own life. I mentioned I was just in Seattle, and I mentioned that I just walked by this guy with schizophrenia on the street like 2 weeks ago. But Friday, I was outside of a ferry terminal, and I was visiting a friend who was leaving on that ferry. And as I walked in, I passed this man with bags. He had all of his earthly belongings in bags. He was thin. His foot kind of stuck out like this. He had a beanie on. He looked a little bit like Bill Hader. You guys know who Bill Hader is? Like the comedian? Yeah, he looked a little bit like him, kind of skinny, and like even had the same mannerisms. It was like, whoa, are you Bill Hader? That's crazy. But he asked me, hey, will you buy me some soup, man? I'm looking for some soup. I'm so hungry. And I said, hey, hold on a moment. I went and said goodbye to my friend. And I came back out and I said, hey, man, I can't buy you soup. I have $2. I'll give you $2. So I gave him $2, and he's like, man, that's great. And, it's $2 towards some soup. I really appreciate it. Like, it's hard out here. I'm just really hungry. I'm going through this cancer treatment. I've been clean off of heroin for like 4 months, but I lost my house, and my wife and I are living on the street. I started to listen to this guy's story, and I was like, what, you have cancer? He's like, yeah, I have bone cancer. I've got this defibrillator. And he pulled down his shirt, and he showed me the scars where they'd implanted a pacemaker. And he pulled up his leg, and he showed me the surgeries he's had to remove his bone spurs and cancer. And the whole time, people are walking by. I have a couple bucks. Can I have some soup? Could you buy me some soup? Yeah, it's bone cancer. It's like, look at it. Yeah, do you have a couple bucks? Please, I'm trying to get some soup. And I had had enough of this after like 15 minutes. This guy does this all day, every day. But after 15 minutes, I was like, dude, I will buy you some soup. Come on, let's go inside and get some soup. But what I saw was 30, 40 faces walk by. Faces down, earbuds in, backpacks on. No thanks. No thanks. Stop. Get away from me. Looks of disgust. I couldn't take it for a few minutes. I don't know how you could do it all day long. And I had to ask myself as I was standing there, getting ready to preach on Micah, having read the words of the prophet over and over, do I love justice? Am I going to do justice? Do I love mercy? Am I walking humbly with God here? It's challenging for me. Is buying soup the answer? No. But right then, I think it was casting a demon into a pig. And I think that we have those choices to drop our swords and our scales, to remove our blindfolds, and to ask, which God are we going to follow? Are we going to follow the justice that tells us to follow societal norms and rules and economy? Or are we going to do what is right for others? I'm not saying that everything in culture is bad, that everything economically is bad, but I am saying that we do have a choice to do justice. And we often don't do it. I don't do it. I say I love mercy, but do I show it with my actions? Do I walk after this God? Or do I just assume that justice is blind and she'll kind of weigh things out? Which God do I believe in? Which God really? So that's my question for you today. Do you love justice? Will you walk with God? It is a choice that we make not once, but every day. In the Hebrew, these words are a continual verse. They're a verb tense that says this will go on forever. I will love mercy forever. I will do justice forever. I will walk with God continually. Let's think about that. Church, would you think about that with me? Let's think about it. What does it look like in our lives? As we're reading the Bible this week, as we're writing poems, as we're considering volunteering for church, as we're walking by people on the street, as we're interacting with our families, as we're doing our jobs, do we think about this? Do I love justice? Do I want to walk with God? And do I love mercy? Let us pray. Lord, thank you so much for this opportunity we have to hear from your poets, from your people who love you and have walked after you and are committed to doing justice. Lord, let us take off our blindfolds and drop our scales. Let us prioritize people over rules. Let us, as Martin Luther King Jr. said, march never behind, but always forward. In your name, Lord. Amen. Thank you.